Solving quadratic equation by using the quadratic formula. I'm going to actually derive the quadratic formula for you, but after that, you never have to look at the derivation. So you have a quadratic equation that looks like this. I'm going to derive the equation for you. So I'm going to divide every one of these terms by a. If I divide by a, you end up a over a is 1, it's gone. This is b over a x plus c over a. Let me move the c over a to the other side. Left a space intentionally. Now I'm going to complete the square. To complete the square, we take the coefficient of x, which is the b over a, and divide it by 2. Then you square it. It's a plus, actually. Notice that's a positive. So this will be b over 2a when you divide it by 2. And you square it, and you end up with b squared over, take this one, square it, take the 2 and square it, that's 4a squared. So I'm going to add that to both sides. So now, to factor this, remember we said last time, is going to be x, whatever that value is, and I like to put the positive 1 first here. Now I want the bottom to be the same, because if you want to add or subtract fraction, you need the LCD. So here I got to multiply this by 4a to make it 4a squared, which means you multiply the c by 4a. You can write that squared equals b squared minus 4ac divided by 4a squared. And to get x plus b over 2a without the square should be plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac divided by 4a squared. Simplify the math. Plus or minus the square root of this, which is b squared minus 4ac. The square root of 4 is 2. The square root of a squared is a. Move this one to this side, becomes a negative. And finally, one more step, and that's if you want to solve for x, this one says is going to be, combine them into 1, negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac divided by 2a. And that's the formula I'm going to be using to solve a quadratic equation using the quadratic formula. It's minus b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac divided by 2a. So let's take an example and show you. So that's just the derivation. If you didn't care about it, no big deal. I just want to show you it wasn't just somebody threw it there. It really came from somewhere, and I just showed you the math behind it. For us, probably, most of us don't care about the derivation. Just let's use it. So let's take an example and just go to that and use it. So here we go. Solve for x. Usually for this method I have 3 steps or 4 steps. Move to one side. So move everything to one side. So if I take the 10, move it to this side, becomes a negative 10. Identify A, B, and C. Remember, the standard form for a quadratic equation is what? The standard form is ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0. So a is the coefficient of x squared. So in this case, a equals to 1, b is the coefficient of x, which is 3, and c is the constant, which is negative 10. And step number 3, use the quadratic formula that x equals minus b plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4ac divided by 2a. Use that to solve for x. Minus 3 plus or minus the square root of 3 squared minus 4 times 1 times the negative 10 divided by 2 times a, 2 times 1. This becomes a plus. A negative times a negative is plus 40 over 2. Negative 3 plus or minus square root of 49 over 2. The square root of 49 is 7. So we have 2 solutions. One of them is negative 3 minus 7 over 2. The other one, negative 3 plus 7 over 2. That's a negative 10 over 2, which is a negative 5. And this one, negative 3 plus 7 is 4 divided by 2, which is 2. So we got 2 solutions. We got the negative 5 and the plus 2. 2 answers. And the last step, which is I'm guilty of not doing, step number 4, check your answers. So that's how we use the quadratic formula. Derivation is not a factor. I just wanted to show you this came from somewhere. Once we see that once, you'll never have to see it again, the derivation. Let's try another one. Solve for n. n squared equals n. Step number 1, move to one side. So n squared minus n equals 0. Identify A, B, and C. A is 1, B is negative 1, and C is the constant. Since I have none here, I have no constant there, that means C is 0. I don't have anything, that one without n in it. 3, use the equation n equals negative b plus or minus. Keep writing this one down, because every time you write it down, it sinks in more and more in your brain there. You should know this like your name. We use that all the time. Minus a negative 1, that's a 1, plus or minus. Negative 1 squared minus 4 times 1 times 0 divided by 2 times 1. I'm replacing the a by 1, the b by negative 1, the c by 0. One minus 0 over 2 and what's the square root of 1? It's 1. So one solution, 1 minus 1 over 2, the other one 1 plus 1 over 2. 0 over 2, which is 0. 2 over 2, which is 1. Again, check your answer. When n is 0 squared equals to 0? Yes. When n is 1 squared equals n? Yes. So step number 4, check your answer. And in this case, I checked them both, and they're both good.
Now, the government said this. Okay. You move out.
Let's try another one. Solve for y. Two y squared equals negative 3y plus 1. Step number 1, move to one side. That'll give me 2y squared plus 3y minus 1 is equal to 0. Identify A, B, and C. A is the number in front of the y squared, which is a 2. B is the number in front of y, which is the 3. And C is the constant, which is a negative 1. Step number 3, use the equation y equals minus b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac divided by 2a. Negative 3 plus or minus 3 squared minus 4 times a times c, all divided by 2 times a, which is 2 times 2. And now simplify that. Nine, 4 times 2, that's 8 over 4. Negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 17 over 4. And I really can't simplify the square root of 17. And usually the software wants the answer to be exact. So to get the exact answer, one solution is negative 3 minus the square root of 17 over 4. The other one, it's negative 3 plus the square root of 17 over 4.
Okay, so Jackson is 1836.
So these are my answers. When you write them, put a comma between them. We have two solutions. Y equals this and that one. Let's try another one, just in case it's not sinking in yet. Solve for x. Again, write the steps down, move to one side. Four x squared minus 12x plus the 1 equals 0. Identify A, B, and C. A is 4, B is negative 12, and C is positive 1. Use the quadratic formula minus b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac divided by 2a. That'll be 12, minus and minus is a plus, negative 12 squared minus 4 times a, which is 4 times c, which is 1, all divided by 2 times a, 2 times 4. Again, the reason this is really a plus because it was like this, minus b. So minus a minus makes it a plus. Negative 12, when you square it, that's 144. 4 times 4 is 16 over 8. $144 minus that 16 is 128 over 8. And now we have to look and see if we can simplify the square root of 128. 128 happens to be 64 times 2. And the square root of 64 happens to be 8. 8 times 8 is 64. And you cannot cancel this 8 with that 8. That's a no-no. Because you have addition subtraction. But if you look at the top, you can factor a 4 out of both of these. If you factor a 4 out, what's left is 3 plus or minus, what's 8 divided by 4? That's 2. The square root of 2 over 8. Now you have a multiplication. By 4, this is 1. By 4, this is 2. So your answer is 3 plus or minus 2 the square root of 2 over 2. So one solution is going to be 3 minus 2 the square root of 2 over 2, comma. The other one, 3 plus 2 the square root of 2 over 2. And these are the two answers for that problem. Now if they say approximate the answer, then that's when you use your calculator. So if they said approximate this, I go to my calculator, I go, let's see what the answers are. 3 minus 2 times the square root of 2, get an answer for the top, then divide it by 2. 0.086, comma. And this one, notice I can do on this calculator the whole thing in one shot. I can use parentheses, parentheses, 3 plus 2 the square root of 2. You close that to tell the calculator do all the stuff on the top. Finish the numerator first, then divide it by 2. 2.914. So if the book says round your answer to 3 decimal places, they're telling you to go to your calculator now, plug these numbers in. But if it says give me the exact answers, you leave it the way you see it there. The nice thing about this method, it will solve any quadratic equation, regardless if you can factor it or not. Doesn't matter what format it fits. So if there's one method you want to know, this is really the one, because this will solve any quadratic equation.